I'm going to be talking to you about how I learned SVGs a while ago. Just before we start, a show of hands, has anybody never heard of SVGs? Scalable Vector Graphics. Okay, does anybody use them day to day? Anybody made their own? And would anybody say they're an expert? Okay, well hopefully you'll be able to learn something. Right, I'm Sam. You can tweet me on Ellis. I've got a few little experiments up on CodePen. You can have a look at them there. I've been in the lovely town of Perth for nearly a year now, and I've had a couple of gigs here. I started off doing some legacy work at Rio Tinto, building a web app out. I did a little bit of SVG work there, not much. And I'm currently working with a few reprobates at BankWest learning DevOps. So not really to do with SVG, but this isn't a story about what I'm doing now, it's what I used to do. I'm come from the UK. Who knows where the Isle of Wight is? Anyone? Have you been there?
No, I used to live in England.
Oh, right. So
I bought a car from the Isle of Wight.
Isle of Wight is this island down south, anybody who doesn't know it. Most people say, is it the one with the motorbikes? That's the Isle of Man, which is up there. So no, we're not talking about Isle of Man, it's Isle of Wight. It's known for boats. It was where the first America's Cup was, which was won in 1988 by the Perth Sailors, Perth Sailing Club. So that's kind of a link between the two. What do I do there? Moved off the Isle of Wight when I could. I went up to London, starting the web a long time ago, and in the early web, performance was really important. It's come full circle, it's important again. Talking to people like Jacob Nielsen, not talking to, reading their websites, at 14 kilobytes was, you wanted to keep the HTML of a site all the way down to 14K just to get it as fast, because this was a dial-up time. It was really slow on websites. You want to get them as fast as possible. It's funny how things have changed and now to critical past about 14K, trying to get that first little bit of information down. But of course, images were always the big thing. They're always a slow thing. And SVG was going to be the beautiful thing. It's going to be performant. It's going to be amazing, fast, quick, easy to do. And it was always going to be the first fast thing, but I moved into back-end work, SQL Server, back-end systems. So 1999 was when the SVG standard was first brought out. It came, 2014 is when support actually came in, when enough of the old browsers had died, enough support was there, and with a few fallbacks you could use it. But I was in the back-end land. It wasn't until about 2016 I got a new job when I had the opportunity to be able to do SVG. So, start something easy. There was a background. It was about 100K. So you might not think it's big, but if you think there's a lot of old people, slow connections, we could do better. Very, very quickly, put it through an optimizer, got it down to about half the size, from 100 down to about 50 clicks, 50 kilobytes. Now, can SVG do better? So the first thing I came to was, this is a very simple SVG. I was going, what is this? It's all these weird numbers here. What does it all mean? So I had to go off, had to learn. And the places I learned, and if you need to learn any more, if you're not super experts, the Mozilla Developer Network, web docs, SVG tutorials, it's excellent. We don't have time today to go into it, but go and look there. Sarah Swedan is an awesome guru. She's got a lot of information, as does Chris Coy on CSS tricks. You guys are probably old hands. You've probably read a lot of this already. If you haven't, look them up, Google them. It's brilliant, and there are many, many more. So I'd gone through all of these. I'd learned quite a lot. I'd worked out what SVG actually is. And this is what MDM defines it as. It's XML-based, so it's very much like HTML, very similar. And it lets you draw two-dimensional graphics and vectors, the shapes, rather than the bitmaps. So SVG is what graphics is, what HTML is to text. Did I say that right? So it's pretty simple. And here is a very simple XML, some examples of XML. So if we've got up here, got a namespace, basically tells the computer what to do. Now this is optional if you're using inline XML, SVG I meant. But if you've got an external SVG, you need it in there, or else some browsers won't display it properly. Width and height, pretty self-explanatory. Again, these are optional if you override them with styles, so CSS or other methods. Otherwise, it'll look great in, say, Chrome. You go into IE, and it will be stretched to not the right shape, and not the shape you're expecting. And the view box is the window. So if you can imagine, you have got the SVG canvas, X that way, Y that way. And if we had a view box of, say, 0, 0, I think that was 0, 0, 100, 100, I can't remember. So 0, 0 would be top left corner, and then 100, 100 is 100 width and 100 down. So it would give you a picture of everything there. So if we had big happy face, you'd be able to see just the bottom half of the happy face in there. And we've got different shapes, but we're not going to go into those now. Oh, sorry. Where were we? So going back to where we were. We had the old JPEG, about 50 clicks. What do you think I managed to create the new SVG version? How big do you think it was? Kilobytes, any guesses? 6, did someone say? About 2.7. So that's huge, from about 50 kilobytes down to 2.7. Once you gzip it, it's under a kilobyte. So if you're interested, this is the actual code that does this page. A lot of it's the gradients, and they're the shapes there. But you'll also notice, if you look at the picture, ooh, it's really 6 lines are sort of blending over each other, and the colours multiplying layer on top of each other. But when we look at the design, you're seeing there's a lot more than 6 lines. So each of these paths is one of these shapes. And the reason for that is another gotcha. You can use, has anybody heard of mixed blend mode, multiply CSS? Yep. It works, but only in some browsers. So if you're looking at IE, Edge, all those, you can't really use it. So unless you want to fall back to something else, Chrome, it would look like that. In IE, or the non-performant browsers, you'd see something like that. So to get it working, you have to cut all of the pictures up. And then you'd put a separate shape in over the top with the color. Now there's another gotcha with Retina. So if you've got Retina pictures, you might come across, if you wanted to sort of draw the picture like this, and then have the lozenge in the middle like that, on some Retina browsers you get a small hairline. I don't know if you can see that there, but there's you can get a very slight hairline on some devices, so it's much better to make sure there's an overlap of the shape so you don't get that. So I've done the background. What to SVG next? So this is what I showed at the 5-minute talk, how to build, we called it the washing machine of death. It was quite a bit to chew off. I wasn't quite sure where to go. So again, I went onto the internet, and you may have seen this example that Chris Coyer made, showing you how to animate the line. Basically, you get the dashed line, and you can animate. So we've got a very simple wiggly line there. You've got a dash array. Here, it's 100 long. You can actually change what the offset, where that dash starts, and then animate where that dash offset goes from. So if we make it a little bit longer, and it updates, it gives the illusion that the line's drawing. So I thought, great, I've got something that I can actually use. I can start doing the animation. So first step, we've got to do a circle. Okay, great, we've got to do a circle. We'll do that animation. And here we go. It wasn't quite what I wanted. This was the animation. It come down from the top, up from the bottom. So we can't use a circle. And some browsers, some old, I think it's iOS on Safari, it actually draws circles from the top, some at the 9 o'clock position, so you can't rely on circles drawing from the right place. So the next step Oh, there we go. I actually drew a line, 2 arcs coming down. We've animated that, so that worked. Okay, if you is anybody interested in seeing how it actually works together? We're moving to M is move, goes to 2036. So we're moving to here, I think it is. You're drawing an arc, moving back, drawing another arc, and then we're animating both of them. Now, if I, that's what it was. If we duplicate it, we can get a second path, and we're getting close there. So we just need to get a pattern. So the next step that I had to do was work out a pattern. So we've got these lines here. I drew a little pattern, so we can see the pattern here. It's just a couple of arcs with some colors. And if I can remember how I did this, oh, here we go. All we have to do is set the stroke to point to the pattern, and we have the washing machine of death reproduced, animated with CSS only, and it's beautiful. It worked. It was wonderful. It was awesome. Really, really great. Until you look at it in IE and other browsers where the animation doesn't work and you have to use JS. Now, you can use various different, there are libraries you can use. I won't go into it here, but what I can say is, should we actually try and animate SVG in IE without JavaScript? If we think about outside the box, think something simple. So I've got a little pen here that I made. You can see all of these will work in IE. All of these loading animations have got circles with dots in them, and there's 2 different layers, a before and after, which are rotating, but I'm rotating the before and after, and the before and after have got a background image, which is the SVG. So that's okay, that's fine. What could we do if we want to create something quite cool with a background image? So here, so this is where we define data URI for JavaScript. Now you've probably seen these with base64 encoder, which is lots of junk in there. It's very difficult to read. It doesn't compress very well. Here, if I wanted to change things, so we can actually see what this looks like. This, with a very simple HTML, can do a full loader. Really, really, really simple. And if we look in IE, it still kind of works. It's animated. We don't have the fancy stuff. We don't have the colors changing and the fake there. So it's very, very simple. We've got width. Now this is a tool I created, which I'll show you a little bit later to do that. Now there's some other gotchas that I came on. I couldn't actually create examples of this, but I have come across it before. Sometimes you create icons and you've got circles on them, and the edges look square. You've got, they look flat, they don't look quite right. And there's a couple of things that can be. One is the edges could just be hidden. You've drawn the circles right to the edge of the box, and the solution is just to add a little bit of padding to the SVG or make it overflow visible. That solves some of them, but not all of them. It might look great in Chrome, but say in Safari, it just looks a little off. And that's because each of the browsers renders SVG slightly differently. They use a different algorithm to draw the lines, to draw the curves. And a way around that is you just bring in about a quarter of a pixel, and magically the browser says, oh, hold on a minute, and draws it flat. Also, when you're drawing SVGs, it's quite easy to just draw, say, in Inkscape or in Illustrator, draw all the shapes. You've got handles on the curves all over the place. If you draw instead with horizontal and vertical handles, it's actually easier than you think. You can do exactly the same pictures. And this is a trick that font designers use, because if you have these lines exactly on the external extents, the highest and lowest, the furthest left, the furthest right, it gives a browser an exact hint of where those edges should be, and you end up with much more beautiful pictures. This is an image I stole from a website that explained all the details. So that's a little trick that you can do there. Now, what does everybody use when they design graphics, vector graphics? Illustrator, Inkscape. I personally use Inkscape. So here we've got Fenders logo that I've got. If you save it in something like Inkscape, you end up with a whole, sorry, I've got the wrong, a whole lot of information that the editor needs. It looks at all of this to work out how to render things, a lot of metadata, a lot of meta information, but a lot of it, it's useless for going onto the web. So you can use tools to improve it. And the one that I use all the time is this. It's SVG OMG. Has anybody heard of this before or used it? Look it up. Jake Archibald, he works at Google, not Google, Chrome. Yeah, Google Chrome at the moment. And he's done a great thing. So we're just going to paste that markup in. And it still looks exactly the same. Oh, let's up the precision a little bit. There's a lot of changes you can do, but the basic ones are pretty good. We're just going to flip between the original, I'm just zooming in a little bit, flipping between original, yep, that looks about the same. But the beauty is a markup. It goes from a huge amount to a tiny, whoop, sorry, I've zoomed in too much there. It's gone from, if we look here, oh, no, I can't zoom in. If you can see down in the bottom corner, we've actually saved about half of the file size. It's ripped out everything we don't need. And this is going to be an awful lot smaller, a lot easier to work with when we're on the web. So always pass your thing through something like this, something like SVG OMG. It's based on top of SVGO, which is a command line interface bit of code. There's lots of other ones online. If you use WebKit, if you use some Grunt, there are lots of things that will plug in and actually do this as part of your workflow and do it automatically. But if you're playing with things, it's great. Unless, of course, you want to animate things, because by default it rips everything apart and tries to be too clever sometimes. You can switch off everything in the right hand side and show things, because you may want hooks. If you may want one bit to move in the animation, another bit to move another way. So use it with care, but it's a very, very useful tool. Where have we got to? Yeah, so there's Editor Cruft. That can be solved with SVG OMG and other tools. That's great. Now, gradients. This is quite niche, but you can draw gradients, linear radial gradients in SVG. One thing that is a little bit weird, let's actually open this up in here so you can see, wait for it to load up. These gradients are all pretty much the same. If we look, we've got, by default, you've got gradients are horizontal. So you've got an x1, x2, y1, y2 values, which default to 0, 0, 1, 0. So top left, top right, which gives you a horizontal gradient. And that, by default, will stretch to the full extent. Now, if you want to have a diagonal gradient, we'll see in a second that you get some cruft. If we come in here, whoop. So you can see here, this is something that came out of the editor. You've got all sorts of weird stuff. I wouldn't have a clue how to edit this. And sometimes you also get transforms, rotates and stuff, and you go, whoa, 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 I don't want to touch that. But if you just remember how the gradient works, you can probably delete all of that and play with the numbers a little bit to be able to see. So whoop, here we go. So giving exactly the same shape, we can say the shape's pretty much square. So if I just set y2 to 1, so that'll be x1 is 0, y1 is 0, top left corner. Y1, x2, y2 are both 1 because x2 defaults to 1. It will give you a diagonal gradient. If the box containing the image is roughly square, it will give the gradient quite nicely. The other gotcha there is you have got a diagonal gradient. If you see here, the grey bit is the containing box. Most of the colour is sort of hidden up in the two corners. So if you move the stops in a little bit closer, then you can get the colours coming in. So I create a second gradient here. Ooh, is it that one? Where basically I brought the stops into 0.1 and 0.9, which was about right. I guesstimated. I mean, you could use maths or something if you want it exactly, but it's usually good enough. So what's next? Next gotcha is SVG2. Last month, the W3C candidate recommendation came out, which means things are going to change. Xlink, which I haven't mentioned, it's another little gotcha. If you're using symbols, using the use notation, you might have seen Xlink : href in there. That's all going away. MDN is now saying don't use it, use href, but of course the older browsers don't support the new way of going, so it's something to bear in mind. Mesh gradients are coming, which I've never played with before, but they sound really cool. Hatch, you can be able to define hatches within SVG. Something that's really, really fun is you'll at the moment paint. It paints the stroke. Was this right? Stroke first, and then the fill. No, it's fill first, and then stroke on top. So if you want to have a really nice effect where you've got text that's got a glow around the outside, you currently have to duplicate it and have a value that's got a thick stroke on the outside and then another copy of it on top that hasn't got a big border. You can now define the paint order of the stroke and the fill, so you can create much nicer graphics much easier. More of the attributes are going to be accessible via CSS, width, height, X, Y. And there's some really nice stroke line join things that are coming up. Look it up on online. You can get arc line joins. Have a look at it on MDN. And some more. Now the final gotcha is communication. There's an awful lot more to SVG than this. This is what I learnt in my first 2 or 3 months when I was doing it. There's a lot that you can do easier, a lot that you can do better, and I wish that I'd spoken to the guys that were designing the icons that I was consuming, that I was asking for Illustrator SVG files. If I'd have talked to them, if I'd known all these some of these gotchas and some more, I could have told them about it, and they would have been able to avoid days of rework to get things working nicely in there. So, talk to people, talk to your designers, talk to your developers, whichever side. Make sure you talk and make sure it works. And a little bonus, I think we've got time. I created a little, where is it? A little tool. So you saw a little bit earlier we had encoding SVGs as background images. There was a web page that used less to automatically generate these from a file. So you could create an SVG file, and when you put it through all your pipeline to generate your web page, it would pull those in automatically, create a background image. And that was great, and I implemented that in my code, but sometimes you just wanted to play with it, so I created this. So you have a very simple little SVG like this. You can guess what that's going to look like. Let's have a little play. Bang. We've got a tiny little circle. Again, you can play with little bits and pieces. You even have animated backgrounds. We saw that a little bit with the loading image earlier. And you can even have quite complicated backgrounds, which are pretty cool. Thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully you got a little bit out of that, and any questions?